Hello and welcome back. Today we will be continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series, and we are going to be talking about where to expand. That's not how to expand, but where to expand. Target selection. In this video, we're going to be discussing a lot of things, so the video is probably going to be pretty long. Feel free to navigate using, the chapters below, or move towards the end for a summary. Now, we're going to be discussing, principles underlying expansion, the most important of which is that you can view your infamy as a resource. We will be discussing subjugation versus annexation. We will be talking about colonization. We will be talking about both reverse sways and companies and how these relates to expansion. Both of these were included in 1.5 and are new mechanics. And finally, we will be talking about the best places to expand, or at least using some of the best places to expand, and explain why they are the best places to expand using the principles so that you can kind of get an idea when evaluating a specific target for yourself. Is this a good place to expand or not? So the first thing to talk about is, why do we expand in the first place? And for the most part, it's for two reasons, or there's two things you're trying to get from expansion. The first is resources in general. Very often people will ask, hey, I have a huge shortage of iron, I can't support my production anymore, what should I do? And the unfortunate answer is kind of one of the bigger answers around expansion is you want to do it proactively, and the answer to what do I do when I've run out of iron is you probably should have done something a little bit different 20 years ago. So you want to make sure that you have a steady supply of these resources so you don't run any shortages, because this will decrease the throughput on your factories. Also, if you have any of these goods at plus 75 price, being able to build these would be extremely profitable buildings, and so when you expand and you acquire, more iron mines, coal mines, and etc. to build, this allows you to grow your GDP by a lot. But the second thing we expand for is also population. This is another reason to expand, because as you expand your population, you get more workers who can populate these factories. And so if you're completely if everyone's gainfully employed, for example, if you just have gainfully employed and peasants, or gainfully employed and dependents rather, if this is all you have, then building additional buildings won't be that useful. But if you acquire more peasants or unemployed through conquest, then you will be able to, build really profitable buildings, so it'll make your construction better. And the third and kind of new reason to expand is going to be for companies. This is not one of the bigger reasons, but it is one that has kind of been introduced in 1.5, where, for example, if we wanted to found the Suez Canal company, we would obviously have to take Suez. And so these are kind of the reasons to expand, and the name of the game really is proactivity and trying to secure resources ahead of time before you need them. One really good example is the rubber tools PM is absolutely insane. I believe we start with a bunch of tools in Yorkshire, we do, and this machine's tools is very, very, very strong, but you need rubber to do it, and most nations that are European do not start with any provinces with rubber. So, thinking ahead, you will want to unlock provinces with rubber ahead of time before you're going to need them. But there's a second addendum to this, or secondary reason why proactivity is so important, is because when you first conquer a place, there will be a ton of turmoil. Let's kind of just pull up some turmoil. Okay, so we have swapped to Brazil and annexed one of our, rebellions that was coming up, so we can take a look at turmoil, and we will see that we are getting a massive negative state construction efficiency modifier and a massive, tax, waste, and migration attraction. But the big one is the construction efficiency. So this means this will decay over the course of a few years, but this means that when you need a resource, if you are conquering immediately to get it, you are first going to have to take the time to do the war, and then you're going to need to wait for the turmoil to go down, or have inefficient construction. And so this is one of the reasons why you want to do it ahead of time. Notably, if you absolutely positively must construct there immediately, which is often the case, or you often want to do this in the case of gold, you can use the Violent Suppression Edict, which will give minus 50% state penalties from turmoil. And so we can slap that down there, and instead of getting, a minus 40% or minus 30%, construction efficiency modifier. I think that did it by more than minus 50, but we also have some law enforcement. Okay, fair enough. We will be able to decrease, the amount or the negative effects of turmoil by quite a lot if we want to do this, but this isn't free. We obviously have to spend authority in order to do this, and so often it is the case that you want to do this in provinces that have gold. You build up the gold, and then you lift the edict, and you no longer do the violent suppression. Resources and pop are the primary reasons, but also you can want to expand in order to get native interests in a region. You can see here we have a bunch of declared interests in blue and native interests in orange. Every time we get a subject or a state in an area, we will gain a native interest there. So for example, for a lot of countries, going after Selangor will be a reasonable target to generate an interest in Southeast Asia, even though the province is really not that great. You can just subjugate them, and then you will have a native interest in this region. This is not very important for us playing as the UK, because we can declare interests everywhere, but if you do not have a big navy and you're not very big, you will actually want to get native interests in a lot of areas. That way you can reverse sway into place. It's much less important now than it was before, but this is still a relevant consideration. One of the most common play patterns for this is actually subjugating Congo so that you can colonize here in Fang. Once you subjugate them, you will have a native interest there. You will not have to declare it, and if you only have 1 to 2 interests, this can be a useful thing. If Congo was a colony, then instead this would be orange, and it would be locked in, where no matter how much we click, we can't get rid of it. The other reason to expand is going to be in order to gain trade adjacencies, which are really, really valuable. This is one of the reasons, and we'll talk about this more, why Brunei is one of the best states to take in the game, because if we look at the markets, we will see that Lanfang is inside they are inside the Qing market here. And anytime you have someone that is adjacent to you in the market, you can export or import to them using zero convoys, which will allow you to manipulate your market prices a lot, as well as just kind of generate value very, very, very cheaply. This is one of the reasons why, UK is so strong at the start of the game, because you have trade adjacencies all over the place. And so expanding your trade adjacencies can be a strong strategy, especially if you can do it at, a low infamy cost. So something like subjugating Nejd here will give you a trade adjacency with the Ottoman Empire, and this isn't a lot of infamy, and so this can be another reason to expand. And now, when you're thinking of, okay, I want to expand here for this reason, I think the most important thing to consider is going to be infamy, and you want to think of your infamy as a resource. We've reduced the autonomy of Hanover here, which is what you kind of want to do at the start of every UK run, because this way you don't lose them as a subject. And you want to think of your infamy as a resource, and generally speaking, you want to stay under 25 infamy if possible, because you start incurring some diplomatic malices, and it's reasonably easy to stay under 25 infamy, occasionally going over. If you go over 100, then people could cut you down to size, and so for the most part, you want to stay low or go really, really, really high. There's a few ways to reset infamy. We're not going to discuss them, but you can think of your infamy as a resource, and also your infamy decay as a resource. You can see here we're decaying, 0.119 a week, and you don't ever want to really be at 0, because this means you're foregoing opportunities to expand. If you're not using your infamy decay, you're losing it, but we are going to talk about infamy a little bit more as we talk about subjugation and annexation, because this is where we talk about infamy costs for everything. We'll talk about modifiers in just a moment, but the two ways you can acquire territory are first by just annexing it outright, and second by going through the subjugation chain. When you annex it outright, you will pay a total of a 5x multiplier. If we kind of hover over here, you will see that the base multiplier for Conquer State is 5x. If you go the Protectorate route, or Protectorate and then Dominion and then Vassalize and then Annex, this will take 15 years longer, because, you will first have to Protectorate, wait 5 years, then you will have to Dominion, wait 5 years, and then you will have to Vassalize, wait 5 years, and then you can annex them, but this costs less infamy overall. If you pay, instead of paying a 5x total multiplier, you will be paying a 4.25x multiplier, and the multiplier is affected by population, and so going after higher population targets will cost more infamy. There is, however, a cap on how much each state will cost, which is why almost all the Chinese states cost the exact same. The cap is achieved at around 1.5 million, which is relatively low compared to when you look at some of these states having populations of 10x that. Now, it does seem to increase in a non-linear way, or there is a floor, because if you look at Transvaal, they will have almost half the cap here. they will have over half the cap at 2.6 million, or a 2.6 multiplier due to population. And then if we look at, Algiers and conquering Algeria from Mascara, then we will see that, it is not, or it is going to be just under the full 5x, but you will achieve it somewhere around 1.5 million, but it does seem to be non-linear or have a particular floor. Now, this infamy number is then further affected by modifiers. So you can see here, if we go after France, we will have to pay a modifier based on our size and their size. The bigger you are, the more infamy you will have to pay, and also, if you are unrecognized, you will have to pay more infamy, and so you want to be both recognized and small in order to minimize the infamy you pay. And regarding your target, the bigger your target, the more infamy you will have to pay, and if your target is recognized, you will have to pay more infamy. And so if we take a look here, we will see that we have to pay a total of plus 40% if we take territory directly off of France as Great Britain, 20% from being a great power ourselves, and 20% for targeting a great power. If we target someone smaller than us, like let's say, or not smaller than us, just smaller in the abstract, we will have to pay less. So for example, only plus 30% to take territory off of Spain. It's going to be plus 20% because we're a great power, and plus 10 because they are a major power. If you target someone who's just kind of as an example, if we target Brunei, which is unrecognized, the infamy modifier will be very, very substantive. This minus 50%, so we will have to pay a total of minus 30%. The very least you can pay is if you are insignificant but recognized, and you are targeting someone who is an insignificant, unrecognized power, or just completely unrecognized power, you will have to pay the absolute least infamy possible in this situation. And so this is important to keep in mind, and this is also why, generally speaking, you don't want to go after recognized powers. You have to pay way more of the infamy in order to go after them. Now, there's a couple other modifiers that can kind of overwrite this consideration, the most important of which is that if we take a look at one of these states that is not incorporated for the USA, which I believe Colorado is not incorporated, we will see that there's a new modifier in patch 1.5, which is if it's an unincorporated state, it's this minus 50% modifier. That is huge. And so I believe these stack in a multiplicative way or semi-multiplicative way. Otherwise, you could get less than 100%, which is not how it works. But, this minus 50% modifier is going to allow you to go after great powers stuff as long as it's unincorporated, which can be an important consideration when we talk a little bit more about colonization in regards to, securing avenues into Africa. And so this is an important modifier to consider here. And then the next important modifier, or kind of the final modifier we'll talk about, is if someone is a subject, reducing or going after them, doing anything against them, will cost only 25% of the infamy. It's multiplied by 0.25 here, you can see, which means you pay less for infamy. So this is why you actually end up paying only 85% of the infamy if you go the subjugation route, because you pay, the 2x multiplier or the 0.2 multiplier for the initial protectorate instead of 0.5 for annexing. So if we take a look here and we go for a protectorate, we will see that the base value for make protectorate, it's not 5 like it is with annex, it's 0.2. So now we're paying 40% of that 5, and then they will have the subject modifier, and so it'll be multiplied by 0.25, and it'll be base value of 2 in order to both dominion them and then vassalize them, right? But it's multiplied by 0.25, so it's 0.5, and so this total of a 2 modifier, it goes to a 2.5 when you dominion, it goes to a 3 when you vassalize, and then when you annex, it's going to be the full 5 multiplier multiplied by 0.25, so it's going to be an additional 1.25, and for a total of 4.25 on the modifier. It goes a 2, 2.5, 3, 4.25 and then you just double it and you get 85%. And so this is how we get the value that is going to cost 85% of the infamy in order to go, kind of the slower route for annexation. Obviously, when something is less of or more of a long-term consideration, like for example, Bahrain has oil, it makes more sense to protectorate them and then, go after them slowly. There's kind of another consideration in this in regards to if we protectorate Bahrain, they will be getting a base construction of 10. always and forever. And so if you don't have a lot of construction yourself, it can make more sense to have subjects, because all of your subjects will get 10 free construction. And so getting subjects rather than annexing people outright. So for example, if we were to start as one of these small countries in the, East Indies, it would make more sense for us to subjugate all these guys, because this would effectively give us a lot of free construction. And so you can do this kind of as part of your strategy. This is a reason to subjugate, other than just the infamy, is you will be getting 10 free construction that you don't control, that your subject can decide what to do with. Notably, if you have a major unification or even a minor unification, you're going to want to play differently around, how you acquire infamy. If you have a major unification, you almost never want to go after any of these subjects outright. So in the case of us playing Prussia, it doesn't make sense for us to dominion or try and annex any of these countries here, because we can get these ones through the unification and pay 0 infamy when we do this. And so we will not want to do any of this. But also, when you are doing a minor unification, then you want to subjugate everyone and never annex, because when we do a minor unification, all we have to do is, get the people. So for example, Central Europe is going to be a minor unification. We will want to get all of these people, probably not France, as subjects of ours, rather than annexing them outright. So for example, Belgium, we would want to have as a subject that is upgraded to a dominion. That way, when we click the button, we will outright annex them. And so doing this will allow us to save on infamy. It's also important to note how infamy refunds work. When we declare war, anytime we declare war, we always want all of our war goals that give us infamy to be primary war goals in the way that we declare them. And so, for example, we would not want to ban slavery in the EIC as a primary war goal and then put in as a secondary war goal reduced autonomy, because what could happen is they could back down to the banned slavery, and then when they back down, we don't enforce the reduced autonomy. Now, we could make this primary, but this would cost extra infamy, so we would not want to do that. And instead, what will happen is, if we have a war goal that we declare, so if we go for ban slavery as our primary, reduce autonomy as our secondary, and they back down, we will incur 25% of this infamy cost. We will still have to pay 7.5 infamy, and we will not get the war goal. So you will get, we will have to pay 25% of the infamy, and we will not get the war goal. You will get a 75% refund on war goals you put in when your opponents back down. Now, when you declare war and you try and fight a war and you don't end up enforcing, then you will get a 50% refund on your infamy. So for example, if we tried to reduce autonomy and then we lost, we would only get a 15 infamy refund at the end of this. And so what this means is, you're going to want all of your wars primary war goal where you first declare to be the actual infamy occurring one, unless you really, really know your opponent's not going to back down. One instance to keep in mind in regards to the back down is if you are full annexing someone, they are very unlikely to back down. So, for example, it could be reasonable for us to just full annex Belungen. We put in the conquer state. It's preferable we put it in on the higher infamy one. We will just force the diplomatic play so they don't just back down. And then if we put in another conquer state, if you see here, very likely to back down. They're minus 67 relative strength of the alliance. However, they will get another modifier if we are full annexing them, which is plus 50 would be annexed if they back down, even though they wouldn't be annexed if they back down because we haven't made this primary. Notice it would cost us 2 more infamy if we make this primary, so this is why we don't want to do it. So in the instance of people who you are only, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types of states in terms of their numbers, you can full annex them, but anyone else, you probably want to take exactly one state, war goals, or you want to subjugate them. So for example, Qing, it would make a lot of sense for us to just take Beijing and get war reps in one war, and then in the next war, take Shaanxi and get war reps, even if we want to vote these states, in order to avoid the situation where we put in on Beijing, and then we put in on Shaanxi, and then they back down, and we only get Beijing, and we're left holding the bag of, 25% of the infamy, which is 22.5. So it's going to be like 8 infamy for the Shaanxi war goal, which we never managed to enforce. And so just in terms of execution, but as the UK, we could full annex all of Korea because we could put all of these war goals in, and then we will get, there's a minus or this plus 50 would be annexed if they back down modifier, even though this is a lie, because if we put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is the max you can put in at the start of the game, we would be able to full annex them. It would be very expensive, and it would be probably better to just transfer subject, but we could do this if we wanted to. And so this is important to keep in mind that, and this is also a reason why, you know, for anyone who's like 6, 7 plus states, generally speaking, you don't want to take individual states off of them if you're trying to take a ton of states, which is a kind of another reason why you would not want to try and annex Persia, because you would have to annex them one state at a time. This would take forever. They have a lot of states. Or you would have to introduce the possibility that you are going to waste infamy by declaring on them and then having them back down. Okay, so what does all this mean for us in terms of our expansion strategy? We will kind of think of expansion as having two types of targets. The first target will be places that have a ton of resources and really low population, because on a per resource basis, this will be really efficient on the infamy. And so if we take a look, you know, at California, they only have a population of 64K. They will have a ton of resources. There's 50 oil and 12 gold undiscovered here. So on a per resource basis, this will be incredible. On the infamy, it will only be a few infamy, like 5 to 10, and also this will be unincorporated when the USA first take it. Now, taking California from the USA can be a little bit risky because they'll want to retake it and you'll have to fight them every 5 years, but this is just an example of you know, the type of state that has a really low population but really a lot of resources. Also, in the New World, kind of in its entirety, these places will have an enormous amount of usable arable land that's not currently under use, which is, you know, you can think of as a big plus, because they will not have a lot of pop, but they will have, you know, kind of a lot of stuff relative to their pop, and so this will be good. And the second type of expansion target is the complete other direction. It's not the case that, you know, you want them to have low resources, but any place that has an enormous amount of population, since the cap is at 1.5 million, roughly speaking. This means that this will be extremely infamy efficient per pop if we take places, namely off of China, but there is, you know, North Bengal as well. But this is from a recognized country, but this is 23 million. The kind of third example is going to be Punjab, and that's kind of really it in places that are going to have over 10 million pop, you know, per spot. If we take a look at the heat map, you see they're kind of all in China, and so this will be another type of target or way we can think about it, you know, in this regards. Now, there's going to be kind of two ways we could do about it. Obviously, we can either annex or we can subjugate. Sometimes you can't annex. We can't annex Great Qing's provinces. Generally speaking, when you are annexing something, you are going to want it more in the short term, and when you are subjugating it, you just want to pay less infamy, and it's more of a long-term consideration. So, for example, short term, at the start of the game, Bahrain, really useless, really low pop. It's going to have a ton of resources because like 40 to 50 oil is going to appear here, and so this is going to be really efficient on the infamy because the population is so low, but we don't need it anytime soon. So even though it's a minuscule amount of infamy to just conquer Bahrain, it's just 4, we would still prefer to protectorate and then run down the chain. But someplace like Transvaal, which, okay, it seems like it has a lot of resources, but as the UK, we don't need these resources now. What appears in Transvaal is gold, and gold is just really, really, really strong, and so we would want to annex this place immediately once it has gold. That way we can make use of the gold, and so timeliness was also important. Also, size is important. Transvaal is a single state. You know, Bahrain is a single state. It makes more sense to annex single states because for size consideration, which we kind of discussed earlier, why Persia's not good to annex states off of, and better to just go for the full subjugation because you'll pay less infamy overall, you'll get what you want in the end, and we don't need all these resources on a short-term basis. Generally, pops you do not need on a short-term basis, but you should be looking to handle it, you know, over the course of the entire game, and thinking really far ahead so that you don't run out of peasants, or you run out of peasants as late as possible. That way you have as many opportunities as possible to build profitable buildings, because as long as you have peasants, your construction is really, really valuable. If you've run out of peasants already, this means you probably should have planned further ahead earlier on, or your start's not that strong and it's just kind of the nature of the thing. But in particular, we are going to want to lean on, multiculturalism, let's come into the laws to look at multiculturalism, but multiculturalism is going to be a very, very important one, because what it will do is it'll allow people to migrate who are discriminated against, and so the very common play pattern is to take 1 to 2 great Qing provinces. If you are one of the stronger countries that can do this, it's much harder in 1.5 to do this as a weaker country, but then you can kind of use these as population batteries for the rest of your nation, and then kind of also just have a more long-term consideration or a consideration for generating resources over the course of the game. We're going to talk about this quite a lot more when we talk about examples. Where are some good places to go that are very efficient in this regard? So colonization and the trade state mechanic are 2 ways you can acquire more territory, generally without any infamy, although there will be some events that acquire infamy. But the usual strategy for colonization is going to be you're going to want to cut off as many areas of ingress into Africa, and then also give yourself as much surface area for colonization as possible, because when you eventually do get the malaria prevention tech, you will be able to colonize really fast, and so you want to prepare ahead of time for when you get this to have a lot of different regions you can colonize in, because there will be a cap of 50 progress per day, and so we will want to be able to colonize as many of these regions simultaneously as possible. So one of the things that can inform your expansion, for example, is going after Congo is going to be good in almost every run. It does have decent resources. There will be rubber that appears here, but the main reason you want to go after Congo is because later on in the game, when you're in the colonization game, it will allow you to colonize Bas Congo, which is notably, or it's usually not the case that you will be able to do this, and so this will give you kind of some leverage. Secondarily, we will also want to colonize areas that maybe aren't going to allow us to cut off, but will give us opportunities to trade state later. So you can see here France is colonizing in the Ivory Coast. It makes sense for us to colonize here too, at least initially, to gain a little bit of traction because of the trade state mechanic, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's not as important, so we could just generate 1 tick or 1 little piece, and then give it up in order to make sure that we get Kenya, although currently the AI doesn't go after Kenya unless it's the UK, in which case they always go after Kenya, but the other big player is going to be this South Cameroon region, which is not going to have malaria, which is important. If we take a look at the map, and they've kind of updated it where you can now see all the areas that have malaria versus severe malaria, you will be able to colonize areas with just regular malaria, and so this is, going to be an important thing to consider, where going after a state like Zanzibar makes a lot of sense, because look at all these provinces that have just regular malaria. You will be able to colonize these faster and earlier, and so this will be a valuable reason to expand in these regions, as it relates to, it's not worth the infamy to take a place like Zanzibar, because it has a relatively high population and not very good resources, but what it will give you is this free, ingress into Lindi and Tanganyika and like all these places, which are all really good places. It will give you this earlier and allow you to secure this, so you have to evaluate it, as Zanzibar plus, rather than just Zanzibar on its own. So the trade state mechanic can be a useful way to trade up or acquire territory that's worth more without getting any sort of infamy. You don't use it too often, but there will be provinces that the AI likes to take. Notably, if there's a split state, the AI will like to unite that split state. We can see here that they value Tomsk, which is not as valuable as Alaska as a state here, and so a good thing you want to do generally when you open as Qing is going to be trading Tomsk right here for Alaska. We're just going to wait for them to accept, and we gave up Tomsk, and the reason they want this is because they have part of the state. This is notably why colonizing in these areas that, aren't necessarily hyper-resource dense, but will give you, see the Ivory Coast, for example, it will allow you to later trade with France for maybe something a little bit better, maybe something that cuts France off from being able to colonize, the interior South African region, but Alaska is going to be way better because a bunch of gold will be here, and even without the gold, I think it might be better than Tomsk. It's a little bit, well, it's harder to say now that they have all of Tomsk, but if there's going to be a lot of coal here in Alaska, and the fishing and the whaling, but the gold just seals the deal. Alaska's way better. This strategy can be used if you know what provinces people are going to want to take, and so, for example, if you were playing Brazil, and you wanted to make it easier to trade for French Guiana, what you could do is you could take stuff in Mascara or Constantine or like this region, which you know France wants these states. It will be part of completing the state. So you see French Algiers taking Algiers, they will be completing the state on top of just wanting it, and so you'll be able to trade this stuff way easier to them. If you, for example, took California off of Mexico, you could trade it to the U.S. easier, although they're not going to want to give up, what they view as their core territory. But this trade state mechanic, influences colonization a little bit. Now you actually want to colonize kind of this area instead of just trying to colonize, Fang faster for most countries. You will generally not be able to generate a front here, but this is going to be something that you use and kind of want to keep an eye out for. If there's a split state, generally speaking, you can try and trade up, especially in the colonization game, and so the name of the game for colonization is going to be cutting people out, acquiring all of the coast, and trying to trade as effectively as possible to do it, as well as, maybe, depending on who you are, pushing in and being able to gain territories that will allow you to colonize inward a little bit faster. In every game, almost always going through Zulu and Congo to generate a little bit more surface area inside of the Congo. So we have here a mod open that doesn't affect gameplay balance, but it does affect start positions, but we have it open to demonstrate one of the ways you can kind of abuse reverse sways in order to gain territory, and you can also use reverse sways to gain territory. So we have this play, it's a revolution in Belgium, and we're going to do what I like to call the yo-yo method, which is that if we have 0 plays we're involved in, you can't do this while you're at war, you can't do this if you have another play, if there's another play in the region, but what you can do is you can yo-yo back and forth in order to generate subjects or to gain territories and states. So we see here for the Belgian Confederation, which is right here, they're having a revolution, we can offer support. They will not accept to become subject, but they will accept transfer state. So this would be a way to gain territory for free, which is one of the reasons why having a bunch of interests, it can be a useful thing, because this gives you more opportunities to do this. But if we do something a little sneaky, if we just join against the revolt, this will change how they feel about these sways. If we just wait a tick, now they will be willing to become subject, because they look at this play and they're like, holy snapples, we're in big trouble. Now, a lot of people view this as an exploit. A lot of people don't view it as an exploit, but this is something you can do. Swap to one side, just with the intention of swapping back. And remember, 40%, it's 85% infamy to do the subjugation route. Of that 85%, 40% is just the cost of making them protectorate to begin with. So if you can reverse sway someone to become a protectorate of yours, this will make it so that it's only 45% infamy cost in order to full annex them. So if we do this, then they become a subject, and then we're really happy. We have gained a subject, for free. Or, for entirely free, we just have to help them out, except we don't really need to help them out because they could have won this war without us. And so this is one way you can generate more free value. Also, important to note, relative to our kind of previous discussion, if you have, these provinces that these other countries want, so if it's USA and California, you can sway them into your plays much, much easier by offering them these provinces, which can make, just these little snippets of the Congo, or kind of in a normal game in vanilla, just these little snippets in the Senegal region. You can use these to sway countries like Africa or the UK into your plays a little bit more, and this is further why taking Selangor in Southeast Asia in vanilla is going to be really strong, because it's a split state with that the UK has, which is going to make the UK a little hostile towards you sometimes. It's a split state that they have, so they will often want that as a subject, and you will be really easy to sway them to your side by giving it to them, which is one of the ways you can kind of leverage this trade state or sort of mechanic, or this sway alongside reverse sway mechanics. But Having a bunch of interest in regions will allow you to get these sorts of opportunities. As far as reverse sways go, the leading factor seems to be not how much they need your help, although the balance of power will affect things, but more so how powerful you are. And so when you're really powerful and you use this yo-yo method, you can gain a lot of subjects. We did this earlier in the run to get Argentine, and we did it later in the run to also get Lotharinga as a subject kind of for free. This mod does affect gameplay balance in a narrow sense because it allows you to annex dominions, which makes it them only cost 65% infamy, but this will also mean that this will only cost 20% infamy overall in this mod, which is not vanilla, but it is important to kind of keep an eye out for these types of plays and see if you can get a little bit of free value. So the first example we're going to talk about is actually what to do when you have high infamy. What's a useful war you can declare? If you're way over 25 and you want to decay down, but you don't want to just be at peace because, you can only declare one war at a time, what's something useful we can do? Kind of one of the big ones is going to be opening the market of people who you maybe want to incorporate into your market because they are currently isolationists. So this is going to be opening the market of Japan, for example. Also, another big one is Siam, as well as Sokoto. These are the three biggest isolationist countries at the start, and so this can be a worthwhile thing. Also, releasing countries. And so we'll just take a quick look at, Iraq, Ukraine, and Perm, which we all released because there's a little bit of nuance and a little bit of way of looking about them. So if we take a look at Perm, we'll see Perm is actually unrecognized. And so this means we would have to pay less if we release Perm and then subjugate Perm. We're going to have to pay way less infamy, and we can see that their population is non-existent. Just kidding. You have to let the game think for, a week before you get their population or a tick, and we'll see the population of all of these 8 states is only 3 million. And so this will actually be a relatively, cheap subjugation, which we can kind of just take a look at here. Make Protectorate, it's only going to cost us 15 infamy here as the UK, because it will be a base of 2 multiplied by 11 for population, and then they're unrecognized, so way less. And so it would cost us way more infamy just to take a single of these states, or not more for just a single of these states, but these are some really good states here. Perm and Ural are 2 of the very best states in the game, and so you can look to release countries in order to go after them. Ukraine is also going to be, if we take a look, it's going to be a major power with a ton of population. And so releasing something like Ukraine with the intention of going after it is not going to be anywhere near as good. Also, they're not a minor, so we can't protectorate them, but if we could, 117 infamy. That's a lot of infamy in order to go after them. It's not to say that this wouldn't be a useful war, but we wouldn't be as much releasing them with the, idea of going after them, although we would maybe want to take specifically Luhansk because there's a good company there after releasing it from Ukraine. And if this was our plan, it would be less infamy to take a state from someone who is going to be a major power. It's going to cost us 2.5 less infamy, but this is kind of a small one. And another good example of a country that's good to release other than Perm is Iraq. And this is probably the very best example because around, I think it's either 30 or 40 oil will appear in Mosul, Baghdad, and Basara for around 100 total. So this is a huge deal. They also have rice farms, which can be quite strong, and potential for both cotton, silk, and silk over here. And so the resource potentials of this place are really great. And if we take a look at pops, it's only about 1.5 million pops total. And so subjugating Iraq after you release it is very cheap. It's only going to cost us 8 infamy, and it's going to lead to a ton of oil in the late game. And so if we have high infamy, fighting Ottomans to release Iraq can be a very, very strong play, as a result of it being low population and really resource dense, the idea being we're going to subjugate them afterwards and come in and swoop in the eventual oil that will appear here. Now, Greece is a really good example of a country that you might want to subjugate and kind of play the slow game for, and you wouldn't have done this before 1.5, but you will do it for 1.5 or in 1.5 specifically because the Koopas company is pretty good, and you would want to get it just for the company. And so so this is one change from, previous versions where now you're having a consideration for companies. Getting a tooling workshop company is going to be relatively strong because it represents a large portion of your economy, and the railway building throughput is going to be much better than the generic tooling workshop prosperity bonus. You might not be activating tooling workshops in the super early game, but this means you can go after a protectorate on Greece, which will cost 10 or so infamy, just for the purposes of being able to get this, because they have a population of around 1.5 million, 80k plus 200k plus 600k. It's a decent chunk, but it's not too big, so that you could kind of go after them for the company. Similarly, Belgium is also another one you maybe want to go after. It's going to cost a pretty penny on the infamy scale, but this is, in my mind, one of the best companies, or is the best tooling workshop company in the game. Is giving 10% railway building throughput, but unlike Koopa's, it also has the steel mills attached to it, and so this is going to be very, very strong. Or was Koopa's? Yeah, Koopa's had Motor Industries tools. This has Motor Industries tools, steel, and also the railway building throughput. So this is a little bit better. Notably, there are a lot of countries that will eventually gain claims on Belgium, like France, who can go in and conquer Belgium. This is the best in slot company for iron and tools, iron and rubber and wood, but unfortunately it does require, it doesn't say this here, but it does require that we have a primary culture that is compatible. And so this is another example of a place you might want to go for just the company. Well, not really just the company, because Wallonia is one of the best mappy states in the entire game. It doesn't have the most resources overall, but it has a little bit of every resource plus a pretty good amount of logging, and so this is going to be an excellent state to build in for any country. And so this is going to be another reason that kind of offsets that Belgium in its entirety will cost quite a big chunk of infamy. You are still also getting a very, very nice resource state, and also a place like Persia might give you more overall raw resources, but these will give you way more opportunities for profitable buildings because you will be able to build local economies with mappy considerations. And so if you already have a lot of like iron and coal and stuff like this, grabbing a place that has a better diversity of resources might be more valuable. I'm a little reluctant to mention this one, but Sweden is another good example of a country you might go after just for the company, or mainly for the company. They have 2.7 million pops, and so this is, a reasonable chunk. They also have really good resource bonuses, and a decent chunk of resources themselves, but the real reason to kind of maybe do this is going to be the company, which is the Ericsson company, which is I almost don't want to mention it because I think it's just kind of like an oversight, which is this 5% wealth education access. I didn't even think it applied the way it applied when I initially read it. It's just obscene. It's the equivalent of 10 levels of the institution. If we take a look, we start off with our education institution at level 3. So when we look at our schools, it's going to give you the equivalent of the 3 level. A level 3 gives you 1.5 wealth education access. This is the same modifier. So that's the equivalent, this company is giving the equivalent, if you are getting its prosperity bonus, of 10 levels of wealth education access. So if you have this, you will almost certainly hit 100% literacy. And so this is, maybe a reason to go after Sweden just for this. I don't really do this too much in my playthroughs because I kind of think that this company is just, it's very oblique relative to other companies because, okay, how much do you really value 100% literacy? But it's also just like an obscene thing. It's 10 levels of an institution. But this would be an example of a reason why, Sweden is going to be a relatively high amount of infamy to go after, and so it wouldn't make sense for, from a per infamy basis to go after for resources, or to go after for, and they're not even a minor power at the start, so you might just have to take a single state off of them, the state that unlocks Ericsson, but this would be reasonable just because you're trying to get the company. So, for example, I'm not sure exactly what state it is on Sweden, but if we take a look, this is going to cost 7 infamy, 22 infamy, 16 infamy. It might be worth it to take just the single one. We're going to take a look at which state it is that requires. Okay, so the company will require that we control the state Svealand. Hopefully I pronounced that correct. So you could conceivably just take the state off of them. It's generally more efficient to subjugate if you would want kind of a long-term thing, but this is 28 infamy. That's quite a big chunk of infamy. We would prefer to somehow tick them down to minor power and then maybe go after this, but this is something you could consider, and is one of the companies that is maybe worth expanding on the basis or for specifically that company. We've already talked about it a little bit, but let's take a closer look at Persia, which is probably on a per infamy basis the best place to go for getting resources, with the idea of making them a protectorate and then eventually annexing them. Total, this will cost somewhere around 70 to 80 infamy if you do it at the start of the game over the course of 15 years, or if you do it later in the game, it will end up costing more infamy because they generally go up in population. Which is another reason why that 85% can often mean 90% unless you're siphoning off migrants from that country. But if we take a look at, kind of their resources here, we will see that there's just an absolute ton of iron and coal in the entirety of these states. Now, there isn't too much wood, and so the mappy of building here initially is maybe not going to be the best, but there is a ton of iron and coal, as well as, and this can't really be stressed enough, about 100 oil that will appear here on this edge, which is another reason why it's a really good long-term, consideration target. A good example of a short-term consideration target that you would want to just straight up conquer is first going through Zulu or, Gaza. It doesn't really matter. Which one you do, with the idea of coming after Transvaal, which you can see has a ton of resources, but will cost quite a bit of infamy because it is recognized. But if we take a look, it's going to cost 15 infamy, and so that's roughly a fifth of what annexing all of Persia costs. But it's going to have quite a big chunk of resources, and also very importantly, a bunch of gold's going to appear here. I think 12 gold appears here. I think 16 gold appears in Orania, and so these will be good places to go after and just straight up annex if they already have their gold. You can subjugate them and play the long game, especially because these countries will now both colonize, and so if you're not getting all of them all at once, it will be a little bit annoying on the border gore if they have just like a tiny little snippet of this and they get to stay around rather than being full annexed. And so this is just, something to consider. But this is probably the strongest early game expansion spot in the entire game because gold is so valuable, in the early game, because it's going to give you a lot of minting, which will allow you to do a lot of construction. And so this is going to be quite strong here in South Africa as well. Important to keep in mind is that it will also give us an area to push in via colonization. And perhaps Gaza is better to go after because it will allow you to colonize up north into an area that just has regular malaria prevention, although Zululand will give you more flexibility whether you go after Orania or Transvaal, whichever gold appears in first. So Bolivia might actually be the best expansion spot in the entire game, and it is timely, and you have to do it early because what will happen, they have a unique situation. They will annex other parts of them. They will annex South Peru, North Peru, and Iquicha, and if you make them the protector at the start, it only counts what they actually currently own, which they don't have that much population, and they have unincorporated territory, and so this will be, pretty cheap. And what will happen, you'll get all this other stuff for free. It is very, very resource dense like Persia, but also has gold. It's not as, the mappy's not as nice because it doesn't have any states that have both iron and coal, but it will have a ton of these other resources, and also very importantly, it will have a ton of rubber on top of all this. And so this is probably the best in the game because you get it at such a steep discount. You can protectorate them and then reduce autonomy once before they will annex the rest of these guys, and so you will effectively be not paying for 65% of that 85%, or of the 85%, the 65%, you will be not having to pay the infamy on North Peru, South Peru, and Iquicha, and so this is going to be a really, really strong one. It is timely though, and you do have to do it in the early game. Also very notable, if we swap over to Bolivia, we will be able to see that they have one of the best companies in the game, and so this is just a little bit of gravy on the top. They are going to have access to the Campagna de Salitres, etc., mostly etc., but this is a very, very strong company. Getting throughput and construction speed on railways is very useful. We also have Sulfur Tide, which is going to make it easier to the prosperity bonus, and Industrialist approval and infrastructure is really good. The infrastructure is the really, really good one. Industrialist approval will make it easier to maintain bonuses over the course of time. This is one of the best, there's 3 railroad companies that really stand out, and this is one of the easiest ones to acquire through conquest, if not the easiest. And so this is going to be another reason to kind of come from for Bolivia. Most early games will feature Bolivia, South Africa, and also Brunei, as their early expansion spots, especially because going after Great Qing now is so much harder than it was in previous versions. The reason to go after Brunei is that it's really not a lot of infamy. It's not going to cost very much infamy at all to, make them a subject, which is generally what I think the best way to do it. You can see it's 1.5 infamy, or 1.6 rather, and this is just a very, very small number, and what it's going to give you is, first of all, North Borneo gets gold. It will get like somewhere between 3 and 8 gold for the entire state. I can't remember exactly how much it is, which is a nice number. There's decent resources here. It's resource efficient on its own, but also very importantly, as we've mentioned earlier, it is adjacent to the Qing market, so this will get you overland, trade with Qing, which is not important for a few countries. Like, for example, if you're Russia, you already have an adjacency. If you're Portugal, you have an adjacency, and so this will maybe not be like the be-all end-all, but this is going to be a very, very nice expansion spot, as well as the rest of Borneo. It's going to be very efficient on the infamy because it's low population, and in the eastern portion of Borneo they are going to have oil, in the western portion they're going to have gold, and there is also going to be rubber all over it, which is going to be very, very important, especially for countries that maybe can't get in the colonization game as fast. Getting a nice chunk of Borneo so you can secure the very strong rubber tools is going to be a reasonable thing, but this is why, and this is also unrecognized. We've kind of taken a look at Bolivia is recognized, but they just have such an efficient thing. These guys are unrecognized, so you pay a whole lot less for what you're getting. You are getting way more population when you go after Persia than you do Bolivia, which we've kind of discussed both of these now. But you will be getting the pop of, both of these, or all of these countries, eventually. Going after Brazil, you can also go after Brazil for similar reasons to Bolivia, but only a few countries can really go after Brazil and enforce on Brazil before they become a major, or they just start as a major now. Okay, never mind. They used to start as a minor power, which would allow you to go after them and only become a major after they annex, their 2 starting wars, which would allow you to give like a little bit, effectively get a little bit of free real estate on them. Now, all of South America is going to be a pretty good subjugation spot in general, because they are going to have, decent resources, rubber, and also they are New World state, and so almost all of their states, if we take a look, are going to have a ton of unused arable land. So when you eventually annex them, you can use them to pull off a lot of migrants because they will have a very strong positive modifier for migration attraction from unused arable land. However, you have to be careful when doing this with these countries, because if you're European, they can siphon off migrants from you depending on what their laws are. And so what you often want to do is, once you subjugate them the initial time, you want to come into domestic and try and make sure that they have not racial segregation. For example, we can use this interaction to change laws if we're not playing as the UK here, but if we're playing as the UK, we can use the change subject interaction on one of our subjects to kind of show what we're talking about here, so we could change the law. What you would want to do after you subjugate these guys down here is change their law so that they discriminate more, in terms of not being on racial segregation, but in fact being on ethno-state or national supremacy. If you switch them to this, then they won't be able to siphon off your migrants. You can siphon off their migrants because they're European, and so this will be very strong in the case of, South America, or just kind of the New World in general, because of them having unused arable land. This is going to be a really, really nice thing, because you are getting more arable land per infamy, because the calculation for infamy is based on pop, and you can see almost every place will not have unused arable land. with the exception of these places having a ton of unused arable land, allowing you to get a lot more of this stuff. Also, you know, they have fairly decent, you know, things that they can plant in these areas, which is going to be good for you overall. There's rice, which is very, very, you know, construction efficient in the early game, kind of falls off late game, but it's also very, you know, arable land slot efficient, even in the late game. But you will have a ton of places that have cotton and dyes, you know, throughout. You will have gold all the way over here. You will have rubber kind of in the northern portion. There's also going to be gold in Guyana. There will be a ton of wood all throughout. Generally a very resource dense place, but it's not really a good place super early on because you will have to eat a lot of these like negative modifiers from, you know, construction efficiency. But we're thinking about it from a resource per pop perspective, you know, also thinking about the fact that they have a ton of arable land. Probably the best example of some place that has basically no pop and a ton of really good resources going to be Bahrain. You go for them slowly because they eventually will have oil, but this is going to be a really good one as well. Sinai is another interesting one where you can just look to take the state off of Egypt because it has a decent amount of lead and iron mines. It has the pop that is really, really low, so it'll be really cheap, and eventually you want to build the Suez Canal in most runs, and so this is one where you can kind of look to go for it, although there will be a decent amount of border gore if you know, kind of just take the whole state. Perhaps a good example of a state that a lot of people like to take that I don't think is very good to take is Benin. Now, Benin will give you access to Sokoto, so you can, you know, open up their market, look to do some sort of moves with them. But if we take a look, they have really good resources. They have good mappy, and they have a bunch of, like, you know, arable land that they could use. And I think in some situations, taking Benin is decent, but they have basically the exact amount of pop that you will pay the maximum amount on the infamy for the province without having a bunch of additional pop. And so even though they have good mappy, it's really not one that I like to see, you know, taken early because it's going to cost the full max infamy if we just go after conquer state on them. If we see 17.5 infamy, this is going to be the full max. Now, if we take a look and like just kind of contrast that with if we went after Beijing, which also has iron and coal, it's going to cost us, you know, a little bit more infamy because Great Qing is a bigger power, and so taking stuff off of them is going to cost more. But just taking Beijing, it's only going to cost 22.5 infamy, even though it's going to have roughly 10x the population here. There's, you know, 15 million population, and so kind of the last example is just any Chinese state is going to be good, but I think the ones to maybe focus on are going to be Fujian and Jiangxi, because this is going to be the most pop-efficient expansion path, and also Beijing into Shaanxi, which is going to be the most resource-efficient one. You know, you're giving up a lot of pops, but this is going to be a big thing. However, if we swap to China and we take a look at the companies, Beijing has one of the best companies in the game, which makes it probably the best expansion. Or, like, there's three places that you could kind of think of the best, and they're just contextually different. Beijing, first of all, it's going to have the Forbidden City, which is going to give you 45 authority and, you know, a big chunk of legitimacy until you fully incorporate it, at which point it will give you 20 legitimacy from head of state and government and 50 authority. So that's kind of thing one. You know, on top of the pop, the resources, all this arable land, all of that. On top of all that, you get access to the Kaiping Mining Company, which is going to require the state region be Beijing or Hebei, and you build the coal mines to level 10. This is going to be a railway plus coal company. This might be, this is going to be one of the better companies, you know, and so going after Beijing, you get that extra icing on the cake of getting the Kaiping Mining Company. And so I really think that the expansion path of, you know, for anyone who can do it, taking Beijing and war reps and then taking Shaanxi and war reps 5 years later is going to be extraordinarily strong in your runs, and will often cause Great Qing to collapse. Once Great Qing collapses, by the way, this is just good for you because this is going to make everything cost less infamy, and releasing countries from Qing can be a strong thing to do as well. Here, let's get our interaction. We are playing Great Qing, so we can't see how much infamy it takes. But if we come into diplomacy and we release, let's say, you know, let's release Yunnan, or let's release UA, and we release as independent, this will cause less infamy to take because we are an unrecognized major power. UA is not going, they're going to be an unrecognized regional power, and so it will cost less infamy and will sometimes even be reasonable for someone like, the UK, if we swap to them, to subjugate full-on UA rather than going for, Chinese provinces, because the main reason we're going after Chinese provinces is pops, right? If we subjugate them and we have also have multiculturalism, we actually don't need to annex them. And so in this, we would get access to pops for 24 infamy, which is roughly the cost of taking that single state in Beijing. But we will gain access to taking a look at the pop 7 million, 21 million, or 22 million-ish, around 35 to 36 million pops for 24 infamy, but we are getting it through migration, will be the thing. Also, we could eventually annex them, but it is going to be cheaper if we just wanted to take a single state, like Shaozhou, instead of 22.5 infamy, it is 20 infamy. So releasing and busting up China can also be, a strong thing that you're interested in when you are playing. Finally, and this is one of the strangest, one of the best targets you can take is someone who is currently experiencing a revolution, as long as you know they're going to win. So we have this situation here in our Siam run. Spoilers if you are watching that run, because this is going to release before this episode, but the Heavenly Kingdom is currently experiencing a revolution. The Heavenly Kingdom has an absolutely huge amount of population once you consider the states like Jiangxi, Shaozhou, Fujian, all of these. If we take a look at the pop and we take a look, 15 million, 27 million, 29 million, 19 million, 9 million. However, when you are experiencing a revolution, you do not count any of those revolutions pops for the infamy you experience. And so if we take a look here, we can protectorate the Heavenly Kingdom, that is the green one, not the radical Heavenly Kingdom Rev. We can protectorate for 28 infamy. That is almost nothing considering the amount of pops we are getting. Now, the infamy we're paying is based off of, kind of taking a look, it's based off the population of 66 million here, which is still a lot, but it's not including this 118 million here. And so anytime someone's experiencing a rev and you know they're going to win, so in this case, if we take a look at the diplomacy, they are enforcing on the other guy. By the time, they often will enforce roughly at minus 50, but they are enforcing on the radical Heavenly Kingdom, and they're almost certain to. What we can do, and what we end up doing in the Siam run, is we can protectorate them for just 28 infamy. And so this is, okay, it's cheese, but this is going to be the most efficient type of thing you can find. You just want to make sure that the main person is going to actually be winning the play. So we can see here, if we take a look at the play and we look at the overview, we can see that Taiping is really enforcing quite quickly on radical Taiping, and so we can declare this, and it's very unlikely that another rev will pop before we finish. Conversely, if you go to annex someone and then they have a rev, you don't annex what the rev happens, and so that's the other side of the coin, and that's a bug. But this is something to keep an eye on, is people who are experiencing revolutions. Often they can make very, very nice targets because you will be able to get their stuff for way cheaper. In this case, us gaining access to 180 million overall pops for just 28 infamy. Absolutely insane. Big nice. So, to summarize, there are roughly 5 reasons to expand, the first of which is kind of the most common, is getting resources, alongside the second most common, which is getting population. These are the 2 main reasons to expand, but you can also want to expand for acquiring certain unique companies that are particularly strong, as well as gaining market adjacency to various people, allowing you to do overland trade routes, better. So, for example, if we subjugated Romania, we would be able to trade overland with Russia, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire because it's adjacent to all of those. And also gaining native interests is a reason to want to subjugate, because this will allow you to get involved in more plays, do more reverse sways, and this is also a means by which you can expand. The primary way you expand is through, plays that incur infamy. And so you want to think of infamy as a resource, and also think of your infamy decay as a resource. You never want to be floating 0 infamy, because if you're not using your infamy decay, way, you're losing it, and there's something else you could be doing proactively to secure resources, pops, or corporations sometime down the line, so you always want to make sure you're decaying. However, we're operating from the consideration that you also want to generally kind of stay under 25 infamy. If you're over 100 infamy doesn't matter, and you just go after the biggest targets, and so this is going to be the primary way we evaluate expansion. When you are expanding, you will have to pay more more to expand against a country that's big, and more to expand against a country that's recognized. So generally speaking, you will want to go after unrecognized countries that aren't very big. Qing being a notable exception because it has the highest pop states. It's calculated, infamy, the amount of infamy that you pay is calculated based off of population. So if we take a look at, making someone a protectorate here and just hover through, it's going to be based on multiplied by the total population of the target. This is pretty universal. So generally speaking, but there's a cap at around 1.5 million in a province. So generally speaking, you're going to want to go for provinces that are relatively low population and high resource, or extremely high population provinces. And so this is going to be a general rule of thumb, but it's going to be, you are going to filter, everything through this. Now, as far as where you want to expand or the best places to expand, actually colonization first. You generally want to acquire as much surface area as possible so that you can colonize as quickly as possible. So this makes expanding in places like Zanzibar and Congo sensible, even though it wouldn't be sensible for other reasons. That way you can colonize on in. Reverse sways are another way that you can, expand, which is going to be, you're going to want to declare a bunch of interest in areas, and also you can yo-yo reverse sway, where you join one side and then flip to the other, which will kind of allow you to cheese and get stuff faster. You can go back to that chapter if you wanted to see it. As far as subjugation versus annexation, generally speaking, you only want to annex if something's a short-term consideration. So in the particular case of gold, you often want to straight up annex, and so places where gold will appear, straight up annexing is going to be better most of the time. But other than that, long-term consideration or bigger countries, you want to go for a protectorate. You always want to make sure your primary war goal is your war goal that's incurring infamy, and don't have war goals, secondary war goals that are incurring infamy, because if they just back down, you only get refunded 75% of the infamy, and so you have to pay infamy for putting in plays that people back down to. So you are going to want to subjugate bigger countries. You will pay 85% of the total infamy cost by going subjugate, make protectorate, make dominion, make vassal, and then annex, but it will take 15 years, which is why gold you just want to annex immediately, or if something is strategically important, you want to annex it immediately. We briefly talked about kind of some of the best places to expand, but the TLDR was Peru, Bolivia, Persia, really, really good for resource, very resource efficient. South Africa is going to have gold, it's going to be incredibly efficient on that grounds, and Qing is going to be incredibly efficient for securing pops. Places with really good companies include Beijing, making Beijing one of the best places to expand, Peru, Bolivia, Greece, Sweden, and also Belgium. These are kind of the places we highlighted, reasons to go after them for companies, but this is going to be, a reason to do it. And I think that's going to, wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed. It was kind of a long one. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube algorithm thing, and other than that, have a good one.